Hello there, and welcome back to another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I'm Rafael di Furia, back at it again to talk about life abroad, living abroad as an Italian dual citizen expat. And this week, by the title of this episode, I'm sure that you already have some idea what this is about. But I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I miss about the United States. And I've been thinking about this a lot, that when I'm talking about things that I miss, I'm not necessarily even getting into yeah, I miss my family, but nowadays, most of my family doesn't even live in the States. A couple people do, but most have left. So of course, yeah, maybe I don't see some of my family on a regular basis, but this is a decision that you have to make when you decide to move abroad. Is that something you can live with? Or are you going to be in a position, maybe you have family members that also actually want to live abroad? This happens. Sometimes whole families, groups move to another country. I remember there was a group that was actually coming through their citizenship here in Rovigo. What was it, about 2 years ago now or something like this? And it was mother, father, their kids, and then the grandparents, and then they all moved to another part of the country. And it was really nice to see that it was a whole family affair that they did. But I mean, there could be the little things that I could say that I miss from America, like some food things, like Butterfingers, York peppermint patties. I have a list right here off on the screen, some Mexican or even Tex-Mex. There's a difference between the two, and I miss them both. And don't even get me started on how much I miss Caesar dressing. That's a step above ranch. Or maybe the things that you can find here, but they have a slightly different just feel to them or a taste. Like what I've seen in Italy called a baguette is not what I would normally think of as a baguette back in the States. And I don't really enjoy what they have here, at least most of what I've seen in the various places that I've traveled to. But just to begin with, I'm not huge on bread, but if I had access to baguettes or sourdough or dark rye, I would probably eat a lot more bread than I normally do. Or even bagels. Those are wonderful. You get some good cream cheese, some lox on that, you're good to go. I mean, here in Italy now, there is a place in Rome that does do bagels, and they supposedly ship them around the country, but the cost of the bagels, just to start with, and then the shipping costs on top, it's a bit more than what I would want to spend for a bagel. And then if I'm paying a pretty penny for a pretty beautiful, wonderful, fresh bagel, I want it to be fresh when I eat it. I don't want to have to reheat it. And, you can freeze a bagel, but it never comes out the same like it did that first time. But another thing that I can say that I do miss about the United States is about how convenient certain things are. And yeah, maybe you might not think of certain things as being all that convenient there. And maybe it's a headache to get certain things accomplished or to do certain things. But when you compare it to the bureaucracy that you find in other countries around the world, and I'm thinking of one country in particular, it's a cakewalk, and it's really surprising how much easier certain things are to get accomplished there. And even not necessarily that it's something that you can accomplish, but something that just exists is a credit score. That's something that in most of the countries that I've been in just either doesn't exist or exists in a very different form, or even like in Italy, it doesn't. You don't find it here. The closest thing is that if you do want to get a credit card, even to get that here, you really have to have a work contract or to be able to prove that you've got income. It's not an easy thing to accomplish. It's not like a normal thing. Yeah, people have them, but I mean, even in the States, having credit, like a credit score, that's something you can use as a tool, and that's something you can leverage. If used right, like any tool, you can accomplish a lot. You can do a lot with it. But of course, if you wield the tool in the wrong way, you can create some bigger problems than what you were trying to fix in the first place. But there are times that I've thought, wow, if I had that ability, that access to that thing, and to build up a credit score to maybe have access to certain things that I may or may not have access to now, to be able to try and better my life. It's a little frustrating at times, especially as somebody who is rebuilding their life in a new country, when you don't have that type of stepping stool to get onto. It can make the transition a little bit more difficult to try and accomplish certain things. Of course, yes, like if you move to a new country, you start, or at least if you move to the States, you would start out with nothing and you would have to build that credit. But at least you have the option to build it in the States. But this next one, it's going in a completely different direction, and it may actually even sound silly. But I do miss July 4th back in the States. I miss the celebrations. I miss the parades, the barbecues, going to buy fireworks and setting them off with friends and grilled meat. I know I already mentioned barbecues, but I'm a strict meatitarian, and beautiful thing. Meatitarian and pizzatarian. Like, let's not get this confused here. There's space for both in your life. But even when we're talking about holidays, Christmas is another thing that I miss back in the States. I don't think I've ever been to another country, lived in or traveled to another country that does Christmas in the same way that the US does. Yeah, American Christmas has become about consumerism and so on. And yeah, there's a point to that, but the decorations, everything completely decked out everywhere you go. But I just remember going to so many places and seeing decorations everywhere. Even if you would think, oh, it's not so much, there's not so much going on there, it's just a little bit. It is so much more than what you might find in a lot of places in Italy, maybe anywhere in Italy, other than maybe if you go to like a Christmas market up in Alto Adige. But even then, it's kind of relegated to the Christmas market and maybe some decorations in some of the stores, but you don't feel necessarily that same Christmas spirit. Yes, you do feel it when you're in those areas, like Germanic countries have that down, but it's still not this big, beautiful, magical time of year that you experience back in the States. But then other things that you can find all across the States are 24-hour convenience stores or supermarkets. Granted, you're now starting to be able to find some of these things in larger cities in Italy, but still, like, I mean, I miss being able to go to a supermarket late at night or in the evening, time when things are more quiet and you don't have the rush. And granted, this is also a complaint partially because of I live in a small town in Italy where things do close early. But that's the other thing, is that even I lived in small towns in the States, and you would have places that were open late there. I mean, that was just not necessarily something you even thought about. It was just, you have access. Granted, it might not be for every small little town, but you still have options to go do things at night, other than just sitting at a restaurant. And I wouldn't say that Walmart was ever my thing, but I could have an appreciation for it. But what I can say is that I do have a soft spot in my heart for Target Boutique. There's just no place like it. Also, red is my favorite color, so that helps. But even Costco, that was something also, like big box store like that, buying in bulk. I mean, even the hot dogs and the pizza there, they were so bad that they were almost kind of good. I enjoyed them. I mean, yeah, it sounds horrible. Oh, you live in Italy, you have all this wonderful food. Yeah, look, I enjoy what I enjoy. I enjoy some of the finer things, but I also enjoy some of the really cheap, easy stuff as well. If you find yourself that you're too snobby for the simple things in life, then don't talk to me. I don't want to know. It's sometimes you just want to have something quick and simple and dirty, even if it's horrible for you. And yes, you can find fast food in Italy that would be just as bad for you, even though many people wouldn't think that you could. It definitely exists here. But this also touches on a major lifestyle difference between anything in Europe versus what you would find in the States. And that is kind of what enables Costco to be Costco and for people to buy in bulk, is that more often than not, at least in comparison with European households, you'll have a lot more space that you can store things, that you don't have to go shopping every couple of days or every week. You might be able to get away with shopping a couple of times a month, 3 times, 4 times a month. But what I will say is that since leaving America, I have regularly gone to supermarkets at least a couple times, if not a few times or more per week, only carrying what I can in my own 2 hands. Because that's also another thing, is that having a car in America is not only possible and affordable, but necessary in many places. And I mean, let's not even get started with the cost of getting a driver's license and insurance there. I mean, it's affordable. It's not that expensive. And the testing for it in many countries in the world, you have to do lessons before you can get the license, and that's required. But I know plenty of people who had like their parents teach them how to drive, and they did it in a parking lot or some back road somewhere. And then they got the license. They did the theoretical all on paper, and they learned that, and they made it happen. So again, that kind of gets back to the lifestyle difference and things that are easier there. But going back again to the space that you have in America, is there's an expectation of having a decent amount of space, unless you're in New York City, of course. Then you expect a closet. But I mean, the last time I lived in a place that had a backyard or a front yard, whatever kind of yard, that was before I left America. And since leaving America, yeah, maybe I've lived in 2 places that had pools, but I never really used them. Maybe one time in one of those places. But it's nice to be able to have space, some breathing space. And even that was pretty close to like a downtown area that it was possible. Granted, you could probably find stuff like that in Italy, and even here in Rovigo, this is possible. But it's not necessarily the norm that you find in European lifestyle, that you have some of these things. Yes, of course, you can find these in villages, but I mean, even say you go to Seattle, maybe you won't be in the downtown, but you can have that option. Or even if you go to other parts of the States, these are things that are not outside of the realm of possibility. Yes, okay, in Italy, you could find these things. In some parts of Europe, you could, but I feel as though from my personal experience and what I've seen, it's much more common and much more accessible in the United States. But the one thing that I would say that I absolutely miss the most about living in the US is speaking my own language. Yeah, I can get around in about 5 or so languages, maybe a little more. I lose track sometimes, but still, doesn't even matter how many. It's nice sometimes, especially when you're tired or you're stressed out at the end of the day, to be able to have that comfort. And when you're living abroad, this is something that you find comfort in the strangest places, with the strangest things. And for me personally, language is one of those. Being able to communicate in my language and to be able to share a thought or an idea and express myself without having to translate and without having to overthink about a subject. Granted, at the same time, I am progressively losing my English, and not necessarily to the extent that I wouldn't be able to speak it, but I've noticed over the years, it's become more and more difficult. Also, depending on the subject, for me to reach for certain words, sometimes I forget things in English or even sentence structure because I've had to change the way that I speak so that I can be understood in those situations where someone is wanting to speak with me in English. Then to be able to be understood, like if I spoke the same way that I did when I left the States, I had many misunderstandings. Expressing things the way that I used to would mean that the person I was speaking to wouldn't understand me. So if I approached my language the way they approached their language, approaching my language, it started to become more easy to communicate, to use different words. I mean, even in Italy, the word controllare, which you should translate as check, like a proper check, or I mean, you could say passport control, but that's it's a similar idea, but it's the check, to check something. But in Italian, the words that they use are controllo or controllare, which a lot of people go for the false friend of to control or control. So I've had conversations with people, the control happened, or he got controlled, situations where it was necessary to make a mistake so that the other person would understand me. Because if I said a check, they might not get exactly what I mean. But if I just make it easier for both of us and use the incorrect word, yeah, then we can just breeze through the conversation much more easily. But of course, when you're in another country, the only polite thing to do is to make an attempt to speak that person's language. If that person starts speaking back to you in your language, that's a different story. But at least try to make the effort. And like I was saying, there are those times where I have struggled speaking my own language and reaching for a word like maybe some fruits or vegetables or things that I didn't necessarily use in English back in the States. And maybe it could be concepts, foods, fruits, or simple little things around the house that I might reach for in another language. I mean, I've given this example before that I always struggle with the word pineapple in English. And it always comes to me first in Portuguese because back in the States, I didn't eat a lot of pineapple. These kinds of things. And no, this is not a complaint in any way about speaking a language. Like if I really didn't like it, I would leave. Like if it were that big of a problem that it really was affecting my life so horribly, I would do something about it. But like I said, when you live abroad, you just start finding comfort in the strangest things in the strangest places. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on another Friday night, and especially a huge thank you to those of you who help to make episodes like this possible through patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria or through one-time donations, rafaeldifuria.com/support, or through the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more. Thank you all so very much. And of course, also, thank you for joining me again for another Friday night, for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see you all next time. Later.